The appearance of the mind forgets its source, the self. Swami Sham. 1. For a person who is fully developed on the level of his ego-intellect mind, the meaning of the mind in the dream state, in the waking state, and in the deep sleep state is to be understood. How does the mind, who is the person or human being, function? Before a human body is born, the pure existence, the self pure, has been self-effulgent. It exists by itself and does not need any kind of light or knowledge for its existence, because this self-existence is pure consciousness, or consciousness pure only. But when the body is born, this pure self-existence with consciousness, out of its own substance or light, its own awareness or existence, imagines itself as I. This I becomes creative, and out of itself it expresses imagination. Imagination is not separate from the I, or the self, yet it constructs the ego-intellect mind and the functioning of the senses. The existence of the ego-intellect mind, along with the functioning of the senses, becomes the subtlest existence of the body. It possesses the 5 traits of the senses: seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting, as well as the ego-intellect mind. This subtlest body existence is a kind of seed, which will externally sprout the human body that will be seen as a child form after 9 months in the womb of the mother. Now, it is to be known that the self, pure existence, has remained the same stuff, but out of itself it has made a design, the subtlest body child and the grosser body child of a being who is considered to be sentient, the knowing part, and insentient, the body part. This being is a form of the same pure existence, which on the level of pure awareness has no trace of any form. When the knowing sense is developed, as long as it remains I, it is pure knowing. But when this I is made into the seeing and knowing part, the chit, or the mind, the I loses the sense of I and unfolds a totally opposite or negative sense. This chit, or mind, the conscious knowing part, creates the limbs of the body. Then the knowing part, as the mind, is considered to be forgetful of its source substance, pure existence as I space. It has an illusory sense that I is never there, and only the mind, ego, intellect, senses, and body are in existence. The obvious part, seen and known as the form of the body. This ego, intellect, mind, senses, body becomes alive and active because of the presence of I in the subtlest form, which is the only reality, one without a second. Yet when the mind functions, it assumes itself to be the real knower, and it calls the apparent body unit, or form, the reality. And when the body grows with limbs, organs, and senses, the ego-intellect mind consciousness unfolds the knowledge of itself as having 3 states. 1. The deep sleep state or consciousness. Repeat. 1. The sleep state of consciousness, illusory. Another, the dream state of consciousness, illusory. And the 3rd, the waking state of consciousness, illusory, which always functions to see the body as I am, and I am doing the work of seeing, listening, smelling, touching, tasting, or speaking. This mind assumes itself to be a doer, as it has forgotten its true nature. It never becomes aware that it is the presence of the source, the self-existing self-existence, which gives power to the mind to think, power to the eyes to see, power to the ears to hear, power to the nose to smell and breathe, power to the tongue to taste, power to the skin to touch, and to the organs it gives the power belonging to each organ. The pure I remains, inspiring the center of the heart of a human being, in which the sense is generated that I am this body, and, at the same time, the sense that I should continue to look for a source, which remains hidden. The knowing part becomes externally knowledgeable through the senses, the organs, and the mind, which is the chief sense. Then it gets energy from the center, where pran is, or life is, and it becomes conscious to know the material forms through the senses, which are nothing but the manifestation of the same self, before the body is made. So the human body form becomes one whole unit, to function and remain active. Developed human beings have seen for ages that human beings are like this. As their obvious reality, they all have the mind, which is totally forgetful of the source and filled with the knowledge of illusion, or illusory knowledge. This illusory knowledge interprets the body as the reality, having senses to become aware of forms and calling those forms true and permanent. In the same way, in the dream state, one observes that there is a body and there are forms. When one wakes up, the dream body and forms are gone, and the waking state body and forms appear, with which the mind knows that the dream figures and the dreamer were not there. Yet it retains the illusory knowledge that I saw the dream, I was there. The same mind says, I am now waking in the waking state, as the body and all the forms, which are similar to the dream state body and the dream figures. This means that in the waking state, too, there is no body and no forms or world. But because of the forgetfulness of the self-source, and because of the illusion that manifests in the body form and claims to be real, the ego mind always remains knowing the dream state figures, the waking state figures, and, in deep sleep, the deeply hidden consciousness of the same mind. Thus the sense of happiness appears when something appears and is owned by the mind, and unhappiness appears along with the sense of things that the mind does not like. So the human being, as he is born, does not know that his total body and the world are knowing the self, which is the I space. Because of the senses and the mind mechanism, he knows that the body world exists, and the bodies in the world exist. This becomes the knowledge of the mind which says, I have life, I have a body, and I have the future destructive power or death. No human being ever becomes clear about the functioning nature of the mind and about the pure knowledge or knower, which is always there in the worldly forms, sentient and insentient. Because of the illusion of the mind, the senses that I am alive becomes the knower, and the things and forms, which never move as consciousness, though their existence keeps changing in time and space, are called insentient. This is the illusory mind, or man, whose knowledge always says, I am this body, so the body is I, and it is totally separate, totally different from the source as the self. This is called the ego sense, or ahankar, based on agyan, or ignorance of the self. Agyan, or ignorance of the self, is equal to the illusory sense which says that the body exists and the world exists. It cannot know that it is the source that exists forever. Yet a human being seeks the knowledge of his own body, born and living, and of his body and the world, dying. By chance he may meet a self-realized person in a human form, who has realized that the self is the only real existence, ever the same, but that the power of that I, which has the creative sense, has made out of itself the sky, air, fire, earth, and on earth the varieties of beings, sentient and insentient. This is what the source I knows, and this is what the self-realized being represents through his awareness and his words associated with the forms. He says the self is the knower or experiencer, or the experience alone, of itself as well of its forms, about which human beings, agyanis, or forgetful minds, say that there is no source, since it is not visible or knowable as they have known the bodies and material things in the world. As long as the human mind remains agyani, or unrealized, it is called ego mind, intellect mind, senses mind, body mind, and things mind, and all is illusion. This illusion does not allow the forgetful mind to know its own source, because this illusion becomes a cover, which the mind does not know, so that the knower mind does not know where I am. Rather, it says, the body is that which I call I am. And since the human senses see the bodies changing, time changing, and places changing, the mind becomes the knower of the changing reality. According to the realized person, it is all one reality, truth, knowledge, or knower. Therefore, even though the mind is forgetful, sometimes, when it experiences pain and suffering, the knowledge of the mind begins to worry and think, I should seek that which is in me and which remains ever the same. But where is it? Then he hears a realized one say that that being alone is one space, one knowingness, one existence, and all the forms are the same. They appear like the waves of the sea and disappear like the waves of the sea. But, as the water of the sea remains the same, the self, I, or truth, remains the same. And if the mind gets opened and becomes in harmony with the knowledge of the realized one, then that person also, with his intellect mind, comes to know that that which is I am the body as one reality is only the pure I space, and the changing, living body is an apparent form only because of illusion, as long as the illusory mind exists. So there are two ways for the unrealized human being to know existence. It is pure, free, forever the same self-existing self, and it is a body form, not at all separate from the source, appearing or becoming apparent only when one is born, rising and falling like the waves of the sea because of the illusory consciousness. As long as there exists in a person the illusion, the agyan, or sense which knows that the self is not the whole, but rather that the self is not and the forms are, the bodies are, and they are permanent and other than the self, the human confusion regarding what birth is, what his body is, what life is, and what death is will remain forever. Only the person who has come to know that the dream state does not seem to be real, because it dies, and the waking state body also does not remain visible forever, it dies. So it is changing or not there. Only such a person will continue questioning. If he questions, then through his inquiry he himself will seek the knowledge of I. The knowledge of I will never be found in the body, because of the imperfect knowledge of the senses, which can be described as the negative intellect, or negative intellectual functioning, seeking something which is positive. But if it happens that, with the same intellect, one seeks and makes efforts, and if he meets the self-realized one and accepts the knowledge spoken by him, such as I am pure, free, forever, the same reality, then he will examine and retain the knowledge that I am pure and I do not give any truthfulness or authenticity to the impure, gross, solid, manifest body form, including the ego, intellect, mind, senses, limbs, and connected objective materials. And one day he will come to know, I, space, am immortal. In Sanskrit it is called Ajar Amar Avinashi, unborn, undying, indestructible, forever the same. Amaram Hum, Madaram Hum.